All right, our next speaker is going to give spider mites and raspberries, and it's being given by Dr. Bev Gerdeman, Assistant Research Professor at the WSU Northwest Research and Extension Center.
Thanks. 2017 was a great year to be a spider mite. And let's talk about why and just what's going on out there. And some strange things, sure enough, did happen here in Whatcom County this past year. So first of all, there are about 4 different spider mites that can infest a red raspberry. Primarily, we have 2-spotted spider mite, and we have the yellow spider mite. Those are the ones that we typically see. McDaniel spider mite is a real warm weather spider mite. We used to see that down in Vancouver area. So, you know, we could see an increase in populations of those up here as our weather increases in temperature. European red mite, I've actually seen some of these up here, but they're just a few scattered here and there, and really not an economic problem. These mites do differ. The yellow spider mite, as you can see over here, here's damage by the yellow spider mite. So it causes interveinal feeding. So you're going to see these bright yellow stripes on your leaves compared to what's going on with 2-spot on this side. 2-spot are going to produce a lot of webbing, unlike your yellow spider mite. So when you see a lot of webbing on your leaves, it's most likely 2-spot. McDaniel can also produce a lot of webbing as well. Another thing that we see, and really something that causes this cascade of events of spider mite damage during a season, is that, you know, the activity of the yellow spider mite is actually both 2-spot and yellow mite emerge about the same time, but they go to different directions. Your yellow spider mite are going to move up to the top in the trellis, and so if you see a lot of damage like this later on in the season, you had some real problems with yellow spider mite. So when you have poor leaves or poor leaf quality up here, the 2-spot is going to get confined in this area right here, and you can have an excessive damage of 2-spot because of that. So that early infestation of your yellow spider mites can set up a worse problem for your 2-spotted spider mites. And also, you might mistake this for Phytophthora or some other type of soil pathogen, but Phytophthora damaged plants often will be patchy, whereas when you have a yellow spider mite infestation, it is just all the top canopies all over your field are going to be hit. And here you can see the top canopy here. You can have both of these populations, and most likely you have both populations at the same time. Yellow spider mite is often called the cool weather mite because it seems to be higher in number early in the season and late in the season, whereas your 2-spot populations will be higher when it's a little bit hotter. And you can see what happens here. Here was a photo that I took at the station, our red raspberry there. And you can see that, you know, damaged leaves can just appear scorched and they can drop. So this can really affect yields. It's not just a tiny little mite with no consequences. You can see damage in here. You can see over here, this is more like, you can see some stippling in here. You can see the beginnings of the interveinal feeding in here as well. So look through that canopy and you'll be able to see the difference in feeding and damage by these 2 different mites. When you want to find spider mites, you're always looking on the underside of leaves, particularly when you have a small or low population early on. So if this were a low population, you would see just a few adults, maybe you would see a few eggs, but you wouldn't see any immatures. You just see a few of those adult females. Here, this is a pretty bad population, and you can see how they will use these veins of the leaves to hide in, and it's pretty well protected. And remember, 2-spot are going to produce a lot of webbing, so underneath these leaves you're going to have webbing that coats the leaves as well. So the spider mite life cycle for both the yellow spider mite and the two-spotted spider mite is about the same, other than, remember, they're going to go to different directions when they head up into the canopy. So over the winter, you're having all these spider mites are overwintering in the soil, in the duff area, right below the canes, right there in your field. And then when things begin to warm up, they're going to move into the canopy, and that's when you see this damage by yellow spider mite. And here you would find, I've got some pictures. Okay, yellow spider mite goes to the top, and your other ones are going to be more in the mid canopy. Your two spot will move up as well, but if the leaf quality is bad, like I said, it's going to be confined there. So here's what you're looking for as far as damage. You're going to be seeing stippling versus the interveinal feeding. Here you're going to have the webbing versus here no webbing. And then towards, even in July, I've seen this. You'll look on the underneath the leaves and you'll see some of those spider mites beginning to turn yellow, then beginning to turn bright orange. That's because of carotenoids. Yes, it sounds like carrots are orange, and yes, it's caused by that color, carotenoid. And so the spider mites take up that color, and they're going to be turning this bright orange, and that's an indication to you that they're going to begin to move into overwintering spots. And it can occur as early as July, because especially if the quality of the leaves is going downhill, that's a trigger, and that's also feeding them these excess carotenoids so that they turn this orange color. You can see a female two-spot, and she's pretty bright orange. And then they're going to be overwintering, as I said, down here. Here's a big grouping of spider mites down in a protected area. So only the adults are going to survive, only the adult females. So there are some trends. And normally we see spider mite outbreaks following harvest. You may have some problems with them, particularly yellow mite can be a real problem. As I said before, that one is the one that can cause a damage that could really cause you to want to put on a miticide early on. And miticides have a real long residual activity. If you can put one on early, then you're going to have protection through the season. Unfortunately, miticides and MRLs, or the MRLs of miticides, are not really, really great. We're expecting that data from Synergistic Labs, but this morning, I wasn't able to provide that to you, but it'll be coming. But generally speaking, the MRLs of your miticides are not too good. And I'll show you a picture that describes this in just a few minutes. So as I said, they usually peak following harvest. And at this time, you have also an increase in your predators. And so if you look here, you can see Inphalasis is the predator that we're following. And so you can see it also spikes late in the season too. So here we were looking at high populations of your yellow spider mite, which is Eotetranicus, versus your two-spotted spider mite. And you can see huge differences in numbers. So your Eotetranicus, look at these numbers over on the side. We're talking large numbers of the yellow mite compared to the two-spotted spider mite right here. But that was just a phenomenon of this one particular study. But generally speaking, the spider mites are going to start peaking, particularly when the weather is hot, because they love hot weather and they don't like humidity. Humidity causes pathogens to grow on them, and you have these epizootics that can sweep through your field and wipe out spider mites if you're lucky. There are some other things that can cause some problems. So prior to SWD, as I mentioned, this is when our predators are active, but repetitive use of chemicals can result in not only resistance, but repel these predators away, at least while you're making these applications. If we develop resistance in Whatcom County in our red raspberry, it would be extremely bad, and that would force us to go and use these miticides, and the resistance would likely shift these populations earlier in the season, and so we might have really MRL problems with our harvest period. So what the SWD program that we're using now is, frankly, it is a calendar spray, weekly calendar spray, and we're generally alternating something like your zeta-cypermethrin, your Mustang, with something like malathion. It just happens that both of those can cause spider mites to lay even more eggs. And those residues are going to build up on the leaves, and those can repel your predators. So it sounds like, you know, worst case scenario is happening. Here's the registered miticides that we have right now in red raspberry, and let's look at those MRLs. Hopefully you can see them. So you can see that we have quite an arsenal when you look at it. We've got acromite, we've got agramec, we've got canamite, savvy, vindex, zeal. We have all these things registered in red raspberry. You can see that they actually represent 6 different mode of action classes. That's good because we can rotate from one mode of action to another and try to prevent resistance from happening within these miticides. And you can see, unfortunately, all the yellow over here. Yellow is either no tolerance or it is MRLs that are lower than ours. So it's sort of a dim picture when it comes to miticides and international export. There may be some confusion about some of these miticides. Acromite is a real popular one, or even more popular up here. There's one called Banter. But let's look at all these different miticides and see how they compare. Well, there's actually 2 different types of formulations. There's a dry formulation, which can be either your water dissoluble granule, or you have the soluble concentrate, which is right here, your SC. So you have one or the other. And when you have an SC, you always have the same percent of active ingredient. It's around 43.2%. Now, when you look at the dry formulations, like your water dispersible granule, good grief, it's up to 50%. Now, does that make any difference? Look down here, not really. You can see that despite the fact that you've got these differences in formulations, the amount of active ingredient that goes on your field per acre is the same thing. You're putting on anywhere from here to here pounds of AI per acre. So you have those 2 formulations, you've got 2 concentrations. The thing is off patent, and that means that all sorts of companies can crop up and sell this material with their label on it. And so that's why you may see different labels in the market for the same thing. And there could be, but we don't know, whether there's any differences in the inert ingredients. Unfortunately, inert ingredients are proprietary materials, and so we really don't know whether any of these labels have any different mixture in those inert ingredients. It would be nice to find out, wouldn't it? Because there are reports that there was some trouble with Banter this past season, but when we tested with the regular acromite, we were able to get good control. So, you know, when you're putting on an application for something like a miticide, you've got to have enough pressure to be able to move those leaves around, because remember, the spider mites are on the underside of the leaves. If you don't hit the underside of the leaves, you're going to have pockets of them that remain. So here's some bioassays from a few years back, but basically we looked at acromite versus vindex, and what we saw was, and this was for yellow spider mite, and this is for 2-spotted spider mite. So first off, you see that the yellow spider mite numbers were higher, and they were increasing compared to the 2-spotted spider mite. But you see in both of these tables that both the miticides, whether it was acromite or whether it was vindex, was able to stabilize those populations well below the untreated check. So both of them worked pretty good. I have heard growers or field reps tell me that they don't like to put vindex on for reasons with labor issues. And it is a hot weather miticide. You're always you can get good control using vindex when it comes to hot weather. And strangely enough, vindex is pretty soft on predators. You would think that something like phenbutane oxide would be a disaster with predators, but not so, at least not so with predatory mites. And we also saw that it really didn't make much difference in the rate of acromite that you use. Both of them worked pretty well. Here you can see 2-spotted spider mite residual activity, and here we were looking at 3 different products. We looked at acromite, we were looking at the soluble concentrate, we looked at savvy, and we looked at vindex. And you can see that all of them really performed really well. got a strange spike here, up here in the untreated. But basically, it dropped those numbers down fairly quickly within 3 days. And in this case, they begin climbing a little bit by 7 days. Also, why do you think the untreated is dropping from here to here? Probably it was quality of the leaves, because if the leaves are going to be dropping in quality, the females are not going to be laying so many eggs, and so your whole population is beginning to crash. There are quite a few different beneficial arthropods in raspberry, and years ago, before spotted wing Drosophila, we could rely on these to come in every year and help to clean up our spider mite populations. In fact, many growers wouldn't put on a miticide, thinking it was no problem, because we would have 25, 30 predatory mites per leaflet back in those days. Here's some that you might see if you're lucky, and actually I've got some good news to report to you, but here's some things that are doing some good in red raspberry. You've got Stethurus. Stethurus is a little tiny ladybug. It's probably less than 1/4 of an inch long. It's black, and I found it late in the season this year. You might see zebra jumping spider. These are beneficial for a number of reasons. Going back to the Stethurus for a second, it not only eats spider mites, but it also eats aphids. It does multiple jobs. The zebra jumping spider can actually eat spotted wing Drosophila. It can catch the adults. Minute pirate bug has been found to feed on spotted wing Drosophila eggs that have been inserted into the berries. The predatory midge looks like a little headless caterpillar. Usually they're light green, or they're kind of translucent like this, but definitely they can do a job on spider mites. So that's that's an immature fly, actually, a little tiny immature fly. Lacewings are also really good at driving down populations of spider mites and aphids as well. What about thrips? Thrips are also predatory, and even western flower thrips can feed on spider mites. So thrips kind of do it all. They can be bad and they can be good at the same time. And here's something that I'm looking at as well. Robber flies. You'll see small ones, you'll see large ones in the field, and they're capable of capturing things like spotted wing Drosophila. So this is sort of like an array of things that you might see, particularly if you were an organic grower, let's say, a grower that didn't have a lot of residues. So let's look at the effects of these insecticides and acaricides or miticides on beneficial arthropods. So we know what they are. Let's see what affects them. And these are, frankly, generalized, because it's pretty difficult to, find reports that corroborate, that find the same findings. So generally, when it comes to something like pyrethroids, Mustang Max is a pyrethroid, or OPs, malathion is an OP, they're pretty highly toxic to everything. So those are the ones those residues are going to build up on your leaves. Fungicides can vary. So not all fungicides are benign when it comes to your beneficial arthropods. The acaricides can vary as well. There's one that's really quite bad for predatory mites, and that's the abamectin. So that's Agramec. That one is highly toxic to predatory mites and insects as well. Here we have hexadiazox, acromite, and Vindex. Those were not toxic to your predatory mites. So again, you've got some variation here. So you can be selective in what you use if you want to encourage certain of these beneficials to increase in number. Spinosad, highly toxic to some predatory mites like Amblysseus cucumeris. It's a relative of phalacis that we have in our fields. I couldn't find any data on phalacis, so basically when you put those residues on, they're highly toxic to begin with. If they hit a predatory mite, they're dead, but you have those residues dropping down, and so it gives an opportunity for these to move back into the field. Canamite, that's acequinacil. That one is basically non-toxic to one of the most important predatory mites that we have that's commercially available. It's Phytosalus persimilis, and I'll show you a picture of one in just a few minutes. Spiders, you can kind of rate them like this. Acaricides, really, I couldn't find much data, but your fungicides are less toxic than some of your stronger pyrethroids and OPs. Ladybird beetles, like your Stepharis. Pyrethroids, bad news. Fungicides, a little more toxic than acaricides, and acaricides least toxic to those beneficials. Now, for some more bad news, before we get to good news. Two-spotted spider mite is really bad about developing resistance. And there are three main reasons why they do this. They have a short life cycle, so they can have fast generations. They also they lay a lot of eggs. And third, they have a type of parthenogenesis, a type of reproduction when they don't need males. So the female will lay an egg. If it's not fertilized, that just develops into a male. If she lays fertilized eggs, it develops into a female. So this type of life cycle is called aeronauticus. It's an aeronauticus type reproduction, and it is a type of parthenogenesis. So because of those three reasons, resistance can develop fast. So if you look at this database, the arthropod pesticide resistance database available online, you'll find out there has been worldwide 501 cases of resistance reported for two-spotted spider mites. Mainly that was agramec. In some cases, it became just like water. It was not effective. Acromite was the next one. That's bifenazate. Hexothiazox had around 11 different reports of resistance development. Vindex and malathion had 7. Brigade or bifenthrin had 5. Canamite had 4. Zeal and Danitol each had 3. Now look at this. You've got Brigade up here, and you've got Danitol. You know those as being insecticides, but actually those two pyrethroids are the only two that can advertise themselves to be both an insecticide and a miticide. So they give you a little bit of a double protection. Maybe. So we'll see. But and in this case, quite a bit of resistance can develop. How does resistance develop? If you spray something repetitively over and over and over again, or if you don't spray well, or if you don't use the right amount. Those are 3 reasons that can develop your spider mite resistance. So after we had reports of large numbers of spider mites up here in Whatcom County, I was really curious. We wanted to see what was going on. So we came up and we went to several different sites and we collected mites. And first off, I just wanted to see whether acromite worked. And I also wanted to see if bifenthrin had any activity against the spider mites. So this is what we saw. So if you look on the left of the axis here, this will tell you that we're talking about dead mites in 24 hours. We had really good control at both sites using, gosh, even down to the quarter rate of acromite. But if you look at Brigade or your bifenthrin, it really wasn't any better than the control. There was a little bit better here, but the error bars are going to cross, so it doesn't really count. And this was at the full rate. So basically what I'm saying here is there was no difference in bifenthrin activity on spider mites than basically simply water. And the question is, how good a miticide is bifenthrin? There are some people that don't believe bifenthrin is a great miticide to begin with. So the question remains, do we have any tolerance developing? That means beginnings of resistance in Whatcom County on red raspberry. I've got a proposal in. Hopefully it'll be funded to look a little bit more at this, and we'll be looking at more materials, especially miticides, to see how they're affecting the spider mites. We did not test banter, and that was again reason why I talked about the differences in these labels. Banter is acromite as well, but there is a suggestion that banter may be formulated just a little bit different, have perhaps some difference in inert ingredients. So next year, hopefully, I'll be able to compare banter with acromite. Okay, and the factors leading to spider mite outbreaks, our SWD program. We're putting on pyrethroids and OPs at a weekly rate. That's repetitive use of these materials. And so we're looking for this increase in egg laying, and potentially repels the predators. And so it also promotes resistance or tolerance. Also, yellow spider mite damage early on will promote the two-spotted spider mite damage. So it makes it even worse. Hot, dry weather, we had plenty of that, and dust. for the first time in this area, we had spider mites reported infesting blueberry. And so in this case, you can see where they were hitting. They were hitting actually all the new shoots. The question is it possible that maybe that could be transferred into the blueberry from a red raspberry using equipment? If you use the same pickers that move into the blueberry following red raspberry, it's conceivable. But of course, spider mites can move aerially as well. And primarily that is the way they're moving, but it would be interesting to be able to look at that a little bit better. Here you can see some damage on the shoots of the blueberry following this infestation. It really burnt itself out because not only along with the spider mites, I saw plenty of predatory mites. So in 2017, following the harvest, some surprising things happened. We were always under the impression that following a spotted wing Drosophila program, there would be a barren field. Well, surprising to me, we found all sorts of predatory mites. We also found one that I had not seen in the field before, and we found Phytosalus persimilis. This is the one that eats so fast that you can't hardly keep up. It can't hardly keep up, or the spider mites can't hardly keep up as food. It sort of just eats itself out of all food available. So Neocelus phallacis and your Phytocelus, as well as Stepharis, which is pretty sensitive to some of those residue. So I was quite surprised and quite pleased. Looks like we have an army of arthropods ready and waiting on the sides to help us out if we can ever get these residues worked out. So thank you very much.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? Any questions?